your next stop, the Twilight Zone.
Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. Welcome to the channel if this is your first time. Thanks for popping in. This is a video that's based around the Twilight Zone. So I've already done, a while back I did one on my 10 favourite episodes of the original series, and it was one of a series of videos I wanted to do. And one of the videos I was going to do was novels that could have been Twilight Zone episodes, so I am going to do that. But the thing is, the reason why I want to do several videos about the Twilight Zone, I've mentioned it now and again on the channel anyway, is because it's such a huge thing for me. The Twilight Zone is such a massive, big deal. I don't think there's anything else, there isn't anything else where I can literally remember what it was like to see the first ever time I saw it on TV. I know exactly where I was. I was in my bed watching it with this small black and white television I had, and it was an episode called A Nice Place to Visit, and it completely blew me away, and I got obsessed. This was when I was a kid, so I would have been about, I think I was, let's try and work this out, I was 13, and it's been one of the biggest loves of my life, if you like, ever since. And I named, or me and Richie named the band after the Twilight Zone. So our band's called Bemis, and it's after Henry Bemis, which was Burgess Meredith's character in Time Enough at Last, which is an episode about a bookworm that ends up on his own, the last man on Earth, and he gets a chance to read all his books. Or does he? So it's a huge cultural phenomenon. I mean, if anything creepy or weird happens, people go do 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 do. And even if they don't know what it is, they're referencing the Twilight Zone. And there's been all sorts of different references over the years. But it had such a massive impact on me. I just can't describe how important it was as a thing. So I was going to do a series of videos. So as I said, I did those favourite episodes one, and I'm going to do a few other videos. I want to do a fairly in-depth video on the movie, Twilight Zone the movie, because I think it's a really fascinating thing. A little bit of background about the Twilight Zone, because if you're aware of it, that's cool, but I'll just quickly go over what it is. So it's a series that was originally created and mostly written by Rod Serling. And Rod Serling was a very ambitious and extremely imaginative and pioneering television screenwriter, and he had an award for a script he'd written called Requiem for a Heavyweight, which is about a boxer, and that gave him some kind of clout on a project he wanted to do. And he had a little bit of to-in and fro-in before he got the proper green light, and eventually he managed to do what eventually became called the Twilight Zone. And that original series ran from 1959 to 1964, and he wrote 2/3 of the episodes, so he wrote a massive bulk of them, and iconically he was on screen presenting the stories as well with a cigarette in his hand. And it's a very famous image that's been parodied, and you know, everyone remembers the image of Rod Serling presenting this creepy story. And what's interesting about the Twilight Zone, I think, I mean, there's many things that are interesting, but one of the strange things about it, if you like, is you can't pin it down to a particular genre, because the Twilight Zone is this place where the writers get this freedom to write something strange, and sometimes it was science fiction, sometimes it was horror, sometimes it was just fantasy, sometimes it was quite ordinary, and it would be there'd be a twist at the end that was just an unexpected moment in the story, but it wasn't necessarily a magical twist or you know, a supernatural twist. And sometimes there were supernatural elements, sometimes there was death in the story, as in the Grim Reaper. So there's all sorts of different elements to Twilight Zone stories. And the Twilight Zone as a concept gave the writers the freedom to do that. And obviously Rod Serling wanted that because he wanted to tell his stories and often give a political or social message in the stories he wrote through this conceit that it was happening in the Twilight Zone. So those 5 years, from 1959 to 1964, this incredibly important TV program happened. And as I said, Rod Serling wrote most of them, but the other writers, I mean, Richard Matheson, who I'm going to talk about in a minute, he wrote a ton of them as well. He wrote loads. And a guy called Charles Beaumont wrote quite a lot as well. And he's a really interesting character, actually, but I'm going to talk about him in a second. And also George Clayton Johnson wrote about 7. He wrote a bunch of them as well. And he's a really interesting, he also wrote the original Ocean's 11 as well, actually. And one of the stories was an adaptation of a Ray Bradbury story as well. I Sing the Body Electric. So, yeah, there was all sorts going on, and these writers were amazing writers, and some of these stories are so incredible. The best ones, doesn't matter how many times you see them, they just wow you every time. And I am going to mention a few of those during this video. But that key original series is just incredible, and it's, if you've heard about it a lot but never seen one, definitely give it a go. And if you can access it on your streaming service, definitely watch Twilight Zone, because it really is incredible, and it deserves the reputation it's got, and it changed my life in such a profound way. There was 156 episodes in that original run, so from 1959 to 1964 there was 156 episodes. That's quite a lot, especially as most of them were written by Rod Serling. And then from 1985 to 1989 there was a revival series that was really good, and loads of those episodes are really good, and there were 65 episodes in that series. And that was produced by Alan Brennert and J. Michael Straczynski. And J. Michael Straczynski you may have heard of, because he ended up a few years later, he wrote Babylon 5. He was the showrunner, and he wrote almost all of it. So clearly he's got sort of Rod Serling in his head, the voice of Rod Serling, go right most of them, you know. And so he ended up being famous for that. And that 80 series is really interesting. It does stay true to the spirit of the original series. It's slightly different, because rather than one story, a lot of them are 2 stories. I think there's some that are 3 stories actually as well, but there's some really good episodes in that. So that was from 1985 to 1989, so the effects are slightly different. And where the original series had Rod Serling presenting the story at the beginning and at the end on the screen, with this one they changed it a bit, so it was a voiceover that was introducing the story. So it still had a narrator, but it wasn't an on-screen narrator, and it was a man called Charles Aidman, who'd been in the original series. So again, a lot of these people, when they remake these things, they try and give a nod, or they make a reference, or they kind of pay respects, or you know, that kind of thing to the original series. And there is some great episodes in that. Again, I'll mention that sort of thing in a minute. And then there was another revival from 2002 to 2003. This was quite short-lived. This got cancelled quite quickly. And I haven't actually had a chance to see it, because it's just never appeared on my TV as far as I know. And this is the one that was presented by Forrest Whitaker. So this was a return to the idea of having an on-screen narrator introducing the stories. And again, it was a very short run, so there's not many episodes in this version, the 3rd version of Twilight Zone. I think it's quite a nice idea having Forrest Whitaker introducing it, so I really want to see those episodes, but I haven't had a chance to see them. And then recently, between 2019 and I think 2020, I don't think they're making them anymore, there was 2 seasons of a newer version of the Twilight Zone, the latest version of the Twilight Zone, that was that I know had Jordan Peele heavily involved in it. And I don't know if you know Jordan Peele, but he wrote and directed 2 incredible films, Get Out and Us, and he's just done Nope. So I don't know if that's incredible, because I haven't seen it, but the first 2 he's done are incredible. I can't wait to see Nope, but again, I'm waiting for a chance to see it. But Jordan Peele's a really interesting guy, especially as he started as a comedian, which is really weird, and he's done these really intense thrillers after that. So yeah, clearly the man's versatile. But he's a big fan of the Twilight Zone, and there's a really lovely episode in the 1st season where it's sort of set on the set of the Twilight Zone, and he sort of plays around with that kind of film within a film idea. And there's some really good stuff in the newest version. So I do like some of that one as well. But the original series is the iconic thing that people keep returning to and want to remake, if you like, because it's so incredible. So I'm going to go through some books that relate to that. Oh, and just a very important point. I was going to do this at some point, but I've been thrown at the mic by Mike. Michael K. Vaughan just done a video of about 4 or 5 books that he's got that relate to the Twilight Zone, and they're really awesome books. And there's a couple in that video that I haven't got, that I've wanted to have for years, and I haven't managed to get them yet. But the one he talks about a lot is the one I'm going to start with. And it's a great video, so I'll link that below. But it made me want to do this video, seeing Michael Vaughan's fantastic video on it. And I know he loves the Twilight Zone. I know he loves Richard Matheson. And it's lovely to see some of the crossover when I see his videos. I'm actually going to do I'm trying to fill in a few gaps I've got with Richard Matheson, because I want to do a deep dive once I've done my Ray Bradbury one. And I used to say Richard Matheson was my favourite author. I'm trying to read everything I can from Ray Bradbury so I can make a decision like, who is your favourite author? But Richard Matheson was my answer for many, many years. So I'll get to that in a second. So, oh, another thing I'll say, which I haven't got the book for it. Well, I have got it, but I can't find it. There's a couple of books I couldn't find, actually. But there was a theatre show I saw at the Twilight Zone, which I mentioned in my video about theatre. I saw it in 2017, and it was amazing. It's absolutely amazing seeing the Twilight Zone adapted for a theatre show. It was so brilliant. The whole stage and the whole theatre was kind of given this sort of old 50s black and white feel. And the script was something you could buy on the night, which I did. So I've got that as one of the books related to Twilight Zone as well. So that's really cool. Right, so let's start with the big one. This is the Twilight Zone Companion. And this is like the Bible on the Twilight Zone, the original series. So this came out before any of the other versions of it. So this is the Bible of the original series. It'd be quite nice, actually, if someone maybe Marc Scott Zicree could do a new version where it talks about all the others as well. Although I expect he's pretty nostalgic about this and probably won't be that nice about the others. But maybe someone else that's a bit more objective could write a big one about all the different versions of the Twilight Zone. But this is an absolute gem of a book. It's fantastic. It's one of my treasured possessions. I think the first time I talked about this on the channel was when I did my tag of personal treasures books. So check that out if you want to. But Marc Scott Zicree has got his own channel, actually, called the Sci-Fi Guy. So I'll link his channel below as well, because he's got some really interesting things in his channel. But he's a very successful writer who's had genuine friendships and relationships with very famous people. So he talks about that on his channel, and it's sometimes fascinating. I remember he does a really interesting talk on one of his videos about Ray Bradbury, what he was like as a person. Yeah, anyway, this book really kind of gives you a really good, proper analysis of each of the episodes. And the background with the production and some of the issues that they had. Oh, it's To Serve Man, one of my all-time favourite episodes. And like a description of it's got the actual the narration speech at the beginning, the synopsis, and the closing speech at the end. Has got an opinion in there about whether he thought that it was a successful episode or not. And sometimes in between seasons it'll have more information about some of the changes that were made and why those changes were made. There was quite a dramatic change in the 4th season because they decided to make them double the length, the episodes double the length, which most of the time wasn't successful. But there's a really good episode in the 4th season called On Thursday We Leave for Home. It's such a brilliant episode. It's really, really moving, and it's got a fantastic premise about it. So if you ever do start watching it, look out for that one in the 4th season. It's a really successful, long one, whereas most of them were like 25 minutes long. On the 4th season, they're all double the length. On Thursday, We Leave Home. It's really good. So this is the book to get. If you can get this, and I don't know if it's available now, but you can probably get it secondhand somehow. It really is a must. If you're interested in the series, get the Twilight Zone Companion. It's so brilliant. It's lots of detail in it. It's lots of really interesting information about the show. And each time a new writer comes into the show, so like, for example, when Charles Beaumont's first episode is covered, so when it gets to that point in the run of the season, he does a little bit about Charles Beaumont. So he does a little bit about the writer as it goes along, which I think is really cool. But it's really good, really well researched, and there's lots and lots in it. So couldn't recommend this more. Twilight Zone Companion. Right. So there's a really nice, I think this is one of the Virgin books. Yeah, the Virgin program guides. I got into a bit of an obsession collecting these on all sorts of different programs. But it really was because this was the first one I had into the Twilight Zone, the Rod Serling program guide. It's actually got some stuff about Night Gallery in it as well, and it's really good. Again, it does what a lot of these do, where it sort of breaks down sort of different details about it, who directed it, who wrote it, what happens in it, and it's it's a nice handy guide. So if you can't get that, this is quite a nice one. Into the Twilight Zone. I don't really know how I found out about this and how I got it and what happened to the others, because it doesn't finish. But there's this comic episode guide as well, which is really weird, and I quite like it. It's got it's like in comic form. There's an illustration for each episode, and it's got this little synopsis on each page. But it doesn't cover every episode, so there must be more of these. So it's a bit strange. So I mean, there's 156 episodes, and this goes up to 32. So there's 32 episodes covered. Look, a nice place to visit. Yeah, the episode that changed my life. There's the man. It's got that's the Twilight Zone is famous for twists. So some of the most famous episodes have got great twists. And that one's got a classic twist in it. The first episode, I was like, oh, that's blown my mind. And I was hooked. So yeah, that's a really interesting curio that I don't really know how many they made or whether I'm ever going to get the others, but I'd like to. But yeah, so the Twilight Zone kind of episode guide in comic form. Well, not really comic form. It's just like literally, it's like a comic format in its look. But once you go inside, there's only one illustration for each. There's only one illustration for each episode. So there's that one. And then J. Michael Straczynski, obviously connected to the Twilight Zone because of the 80s series. I've got a lot of time for him. He did a bunch of comics as well. There's another comic run as well that's based on the Twilight Zone. So there's a few comic runs that are based on the Twilight Zone. And this was the first one that was made, but there's a lot of those. Yeah, I think it goes into double figures. So there's quite a few of those, but this is the only one I've managed to find so far. So there's that. And I don't really collect like proper comics, so this is why I haven't got loads of them, but I will collect the Twilight Zone ones when I find them. And then another thing related to comics, this is newly released. This only came out recently. This came out this year. And I love it. Absolutely love it. I bought it straight away. As soon as I found it, I had to have it. I have mentioned it on the channel because I talked about it on one of the monthly roundups. And this is called The Twilight Man. And it's like a graphic novel biography of Rod Serling. And it's really good. It's really good. It's got a lovely kind of sort of graphic style that makes it look like the original series, which I think is really good. And it covers his relationship with the armed forces. It's all got this. It's all based around a wraparound story where he's on a plane telling this woman about his life, and in it you get his success, and you get the process of writing these different things, and then eventually writing the Twilight Zone, and the pressure from the bosses to do different things with the show. And then there's times when it was difficult for him, and it's really, really good, really good. And then there's a very cool Twilight Zone-y twist at the end as well. So there's like a narrative conceit in it. So yeah, this is really good. So I definitely recommend this, and it's quite new. So there's that, and then there's this lovely book. So as I said, Richard Matheson wrote tons of stories for it, and Richard Matheson's a great man. As I said, I absolutely love Richard Matheson, and this is a really interesting book called The Twilight and Other Zones, The Dark Worlds of Richard Matheson. There's lots and lots of essays, and there's speeches in it. There's a speech from his son about him. There's lots of essays and just sort of writing about Richard Matheson from various people, and the people that are contributing is so cool. So this has, for example, Joe Lonsdale, Dennis Etchison, Harlan Ellison, Bettina Matheson, relative, Chris Matheson, another relative, obviously Richard Christian Matheson, who's a very famous author in his own right, Greg Cox, Gahan Wilson, Jack Ketchum, William F. Nolan, who I'll mention in a minute. There's so many people that have contributed to this, and it's basically it's a collection of these different things that relate to somebody talking about Richard Matheson. So it's a really interesting book. So if you want to get this, then I think this is relatively new. Should still be available, but it won't be very easy to find, but you should be able to order it. So this is really cool. Hello, I'm coming from another dimension, not of sight and sound, but of mind. Well, I've actually forgotten to include this book. So this is everything I need to know about the Twilight. No, everything I need to know I learned from the Twilight Zone. It's a really good book, really good book. So I didn't want to miss it out because I had this bought for me, and I didn't know what to expect. And this person, David Dawidziak, really knows his stuff. It's really like detailed about the Twilight Zone, but it looks into some of the messages of the stories as well. So it looks at the social and political content in the stories, which is a really big part of the original series and the other ones as well. But this focuses on the original series, and the stories had something to say, and they were done brilliantly. So this is a really good book. Everything I need to know I learned from the Twilight Zone. As you were, Gareth. So, talking more about these particular writers for a second, you've got Rod Serling, obviously wrote most of them, and it was his creation, it was his baby, and he's the genius behind the Twilight Zone. There's a really nice collection he's edited here called Rod Serling's Triple W, Witches, Warlocks and Werewolves. It's really good, and it's got again some really interesting writers like Gordon R. Dixon and Fritz Lieber, Rudyard Kipling, Charles Finney, and Charles Mackay. So all sorts of people and a few others, and he's got this collection together, and you can sometimes see this like second hand. It's not available now, but it's definitely worth getting. So this was an anthology that Rod Serling edited, and I want to just mention these other writers for a second and just talk about how it's a good idea to get their stuff. So obviously Richard Matheson is most famous for I Am Legend. I Am Legend is an absolute masterpiece, and if you haven't read it, I definitely recommend you read it. There's been a few people on BookTube that have just decided to do a group read of it, which is really cool. So I mean, it's still current. It's not. I don't think it's dated. There's been 4 different films made of it, and all 4 films are nothing like the book. Don't get me started. But yeah, absolute masterpiece. So I'm just showing this up here. I've done a special video on I Am Legend as well, if you're interested in seeing it. But The Shrinking Man's great as well, and there's all sorts of stuff by Richard Matheson. It's great. But I was going to show you this, which is a short story collection, which its title for this book is actually the title of an episode of the 80s Twilight Zone. So they did make an adaptation of Button Button, which is amazing. And then they made a feature film of that story where they just completely changed the whole plot and narrative of it, which is ridiculous. And it does work better as a short story, so they're probably a bit desperate. How do we string this out for a feature film? Well, don't, if you're going to change it all. But yeah, the actual short story, Button Button, is so brilliant, so good, fantastic idea, and really creepy and thought-provoking. So yeah, Rich, this is a nice collection. It's got loads of his best ones, but there's also the best of Richard Matheson. That's a good Penguin book as well you can get. And then Charles Beaumont, as I mentioned, he's done various different episodes of the original series, and his stories were quite pensive and reflective, I think, and quite dark. And he's got a fantastic collection out called Perchance to Dream, which is actually the title of one of his Twilight Zone episodes. But that's a really good story collection that I'd massively recommend. So if you're curious about that, if maybe you've seen some of his episodes and you think, oh, he sounds like an interesting writer, very interesting person in real life as well, actually, then look up for this Perchance to Dream collection, because it's really good. So I definitely recommend that. Charles Beaumont's Per Chance to Dream. And George Clayton Johnson did about 6 or 7 episodes. He did Game of Pool, which is an amazing episode. He did Kick the Can as well, which is a very popular one that was remade in the film. And he actually co-wrote Logan's Run. So this is the book that they developed into the films. It was a book first, and it was written by William F. Nolan and George Clayton Johnson. So I think that's pretty cool. So I've always loved Logan's Run, and it's one of my favourite films. And I did a podcast a little while ago with 2 friends, and we decided, well, they asked me to pick a film, and all 3 of us would watch it, and then we'd talk about it on the podcast. And they, the other 2 said they thought it was awful and too dated and all sorts of things. And I can't see that. I don't know if it's rose tinted glasses, but to me, Logan's Run isn't dated. But the book is awesome. It is different, it's slightly different, as most of the books are. Same as the book of Planet of the Apes is different, and the ending is different. The twist in Planet of the Apes is different as well. Rod Serling did one of the treatments of the script, so if you love the original film with the Planet of the Apes, Rod Serling had a big hand in that script. But yeah, Logan's Run is a great book, I think, and that's written by George Clayton Johnson. So recommend that those writers are worth looking into, and those books are examples of that. So going back to the episodes, this is a collection of stories that mostly relate to the 80s series. I think there are some here that weren't adapted, so I think some of them were planned to be adapted. But again, fantastic authors that are listed in this. So you've got people like Harlan Ellison, which I'll get to in a second, Alan Burnett, who was one of the producers, but he did write some of them. There's a story called Healer in that, which is a quite good one. Robert McCammon. So I know there's a few Robert McCammon readers on BookTube and friends on here. And he wrote an episode called Nightcrawlers, and that's on here, so that's really cool. And Ray Bradbury's The Burning Man. There's a few, Joel Haldeman's Eye of Newton, Arthur C. Clarke, Theodore Sturgeon, Robert Silverberg, Greg Bear, Richard Matheson's Buttons in here, and Roger Zelazny, and all sorts of people like that. So a few others as well. But it's a really good collection, and it's what's great is that ultimately the original series were great short stories, basically, and you can get some really great short stories in collections like this. And Michael K. Vaughan showed things like this that relate to the original series. So those 2 books that he talked about that Rod Serling wrote, where he adapted the stories, I think these were stories first, but again, it's that idea of reading really cool short stories. So these are based on what happened for the 80s series. And talking of the 80s series, there's a fantastic episode that was directed by Wes Craven, and it was starred Bruce Willis as the main character, and it was called Shatterday. And Shatterday was written by Harlan Ellison, and it's a really good collection. So it's one of the later collections, if you like, because Harlan Ellison's reputation was built on the first few anthologies that came out, and a lot of the classics like I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream and Repentant Harlequin, so the TikTok Man, stuff like that, and the Deathbird stories. But this a little bit later than that, but it's really good, so I definitely recommend it. And Shatterday itself is such a good story, and the episode is really good, and it's actually a rare moment because it was before he did Unbreakable, and up to that point Bruce Willis, I think, had only done Moonlighting. I don't think he'd done any films. He was really early. I mean, this is like like mid 80s, so I don't know, he might have done Die Hard, I don't know, but definitely it was a surprise that he was doing such an intensely serious role in Shatterday. So yeah, it's a good collection. And again, staying with the 80s series for a second, Michael Straczynski did bring out a book about script writing, and he does talk about the process of writing for the Twilight Zone and some advice for writers that might want to write a Twilight Zone type of episode. And there is a section in this book about that. It's a really good book, and he talks about the Babylon 5 and all that sort of stuff in there, and it's got like bits of script and analyze and you've got actual his thought process and his advice about writing. So that was really cool. That was in a period that I'd buy anything that had Babylon 5 mentioned on the book. I haven't got all those books anymore, but this is quite special, I think, because it's J. Michael Straczynski talking about the craft of screenwriting. So yeah, that's a really good one, and does mention the Twilight Zone a few times. And then one last one that I don't think I've got any more after this, and quite actually it's got over 30 minutes, just as well, really. This is a really nice book that does feature the Twilight Zone. It's the story Where Is Everybody by Rod Serling that's in there, but it's got loads and loads of stories. It's quite a thick book, quite a thick anthology, and I've had it ages. And there's loads. Basically, the idea is the Armchair Horror Collection. These are stories that have featured on TV shows or have been adapted into TV show episodes, like things like Ray Bradbury Theatre or Tales from the Crypt or things like that. The anthology shows, there was like Steven Spielberg Presents, that was another anthology show that came on TV, stuff like that. And it's just really good. It's got some really cool writers in it, like Roald Dahl, Algernon Blackwood, John Wyndham, Clifford Simak, Kingsley Amis, William F. Nolan again, Stephen King, Richard Matheson, Robert Bloch. There's all sorts of different writers in this. There's a really good collection. So if you ever see that, the Armchair Horror Collection, it's worth looking at. So again, this is quite nice because it's got Where Is Everybody, which was the pilot episode of the Twilight Zone. So that's kind of the first episode, if you like, Where Is Everybody. It really kind of exemplifies what you're going to expect with the Twilight Zone, I think. It's a really good episode and written by Rod Serling. So there we go. That's my new video on the Twilight Zone. There will be others, but I can't tell you how much I love it. It's such an important show to me, and I'd love to know what your favourite episodes are, what you love about the Twilight Zone. If you like other things that these people have written, I'd love to know about it. Please comment below on anything to do with the Twilight Zone. I could talk about the Twilight Zone for hours and hours and hours and hours. So yeah, next one will probably be about the film. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye.
Picture of what it's like to